It's tough to put an impulse into words. By its nature, it's an instinctive urge, a sudden, powerful feeling that drives action, detached from logic and consideration. For instance, I couldn't explain why I had driven the key of my Dodge Pontiac into the soft flesh beneath the security guard's jaw. Aside from the fact that the painting relieved my headache and he was trying to pull me away from it, the detective had already dismissed that explanation as insufficient. But that was the truth I had access to in that moment. After what felt like the 40th time he asked, all I could do was shrug. The return of my long-standing headache wasn't helping either. The moment my gaze left the painting, the pain slammed back in. It felt like my skull had its own heartbeat, a paralyzing ache I was all too familiar with. This unbearable pain had been with me for about 15 years. An undiagnosed migraine disorder that began when I was just 3 years old. Each doctor's visit would start with a review of my family history. No migraines on my father's side, and my mother left us when I was a toddler. She disappeared in the middle of the night, without a word. My dad always said she wasn't very open about her health, either. We both assumed I inherited this affliction from her. No brain scan ever showed any abnormalities. The pain wasn't the result of a typical seizure. As far as Western medicine was concerned, I was as healthy as could be. Psychiatrists chalked it up to subconscious trauma from being abandoned, but antidepressants never made the pain go away. I learned to live with it, even endure bad dates while dealing with it. I had never been to a museum before today. Dad always made them seem boring, a waste of time for people who had nothing else to do. The one time my school went on a field trip to a local museum, Dad forbade me from going. It seemed odd in hindsight, but at 9, I was just happy to skip a day of school. Today, my boyfriend insisted we go, and I didn't have the energy to argue. I figured Dad would say no, and that would be the end of it. To my surprise, he didn't say that at all. "Sure, honey. I think today's a perfect day for it." Dad was right. The experience was a slog, except for that miracle painting, of course. Whenever my eyes landed on it, no matter the distance, the pain eased. I wasn't even consciously focusing on it at first. Instead, an unexpected relief seemed to pull me in, guiding me through the maze of halls until I found myself standing right in front of it, enveloped in its soothing pull. Frozen, I stood still. It was a small square watercolor, each side only about 6 inches long, unassuming to everyone else but me. I couldn't make out the exact details of the composition. The canvas was a storm of color, a surface overwhelmed by a whirl of animated pigment. I couldn't believe the decaying wooden frame was able to contain such a vast, swirling energy. At any moment, it felt as if the colors might burst free from their fragile prison, flooding the museum in a wave of indigo and crimson, engulfing everyone in its path. As I stared, the hypnotic swirls provided more relief than any painkiller ever could. The plaque beside the painting read, "My Last Red Cradle by Dupuy." Considered by many to be the final great work of modernism, it is said to be inspired by the architecture of an umbilical cord. When asked about the meaning behind the piece, Ms. Dupuy offered this cryptic response: "Meaningful art is always built on sacrifice. Desperation is the canvas. Blood is the paint. When the time comes to become legion, don't fear surrendering." I didn't even realize my nose was pressed against the canvas until I impulsively thrust a key through the security guard's jaw. Another example of an impulse. When the guard released me, I instinctively stepped between him and the painting, as if shielding it from the blood about to spill. I didn't know why I cared about protecting the artwork, but in that moment, nothing else seemed more important. Not that impulses are arbitrary. It's just that sometimes you don't fully understand what's driving you in the moment. After posting bail and getting my phone back, I rushed to my car and immediately searched online for the painting. It didn't take long to find it, but it didn't have the same effect as the original at the museum. No matter how big I made the image, no matter the resolution, it didn't give me a shred of relief. Instead, pain and frustration spun in chaotic circles around my skull, and I almost broke down. Just before I lost it, though, something caught my eye on the screen, a familiar feeling. The artist Dupuis looked strikingly like me. When I got home, I confronted my dad with what I had found. Dupuis, he explained, was my mother's maiden name. He had known all along where she had been and what she had been doing, but chose not to tell me. His words, not mine. Suddenly, my headache erupted, fiercer than ever before. My legs gave way from the pain, and I collapsed onto the floor. As Dad bent over me, I felt my teeth ache to sink into his neck, drawn by the same magnetism I had felt in front of the painting. Before I could bite down, I pulled back, fighting the dangerous impulse. I didn't want to hurt him. To my surprise, Dad didn't move away as I rested my teeth against his neck, struggling to keep my jaw open. If I bit down, he'd be dead. But he didn't flinch. He just waited, calm and understanding. After about a minute of that agonizing silence, he finally spoke. I could feel the pulse of his blood under my upper lip. "Do it, Felicity. This is what we've all been waiting for. Turn your suffering into purpose. Your desperation, the canvas. With my blood, you can paint the red cradle. Go be with your mother. You've earned it." Took every ounce of willpower I had, but I managed to pull away from my dad. Slowly, I removed my teeth from his neck and took a few steps back. For the first time, I refused to give in to the impulse. Nothing, not even the gut-wrenching pain, could control me like that. In response, Dad crumpled to the kitchen floor, letting his head rest awkwardly against the oven as he lay on his back. He was quiet for a moment, then suddenly, his voice erupted in laughter. Between gasps of cackling, I heard him say, "What a waste! Ms. Dupuis is going to be so mad." As his laughter grew more strained and maniacal, blood began to pour from the corners of his eyes. It wasn't tears. The flow was too quick, too unnatural. The pressure was so intense that it made a hissing sound as it poured from his tear ducts. With each drop, the whites of his eyes turned solid black, and his skin began to melt, like wax dripping down a candle. When the blood hit the floor, it didn't just form a puddle. It kept its rapid pace and began to move toward me, relentlessly following my every step as I bolted out the door. I jumped into my car, watching as crimson streaks spilled over the doorframe. I heard Dad screaming something in a language I couldn't understand. The same few nonsensical words, deep and guttural, over and over. Now, I'm holed up in a motel on the outskirts of town, typing this out, trying to make sense of it all. My boyfriend is on his way here, but I'm not sure he'll believe me when I tell him what happened. I don't think that man was my real father. Dupuis, however, might actually be my mother. As much as I don't want to accept it, it feels right. I'm trying not to give in to the pain, but my skull is absolutely pounding. That said, I've noticed something different about the pain, too. It's almost like a compass. When I turn my head, the pain doesn't stay in the same spot. Instead, it shifts in the opposite direction, ensuring it always points the same way, no matter how I move my head. It's like some infernal weather vane buried deep in my psyche. My impulse is to follow the pain wherever it leads me. As much as I don't want to give in, I feel my resistance weakening, worn down by years of searing agony. What in God's name am I? Is there even a point in resisting, or am I just delaying the inevitable? Does anyone know what any of this means?